Abortion Ethics in a Nutshell, a pro-both tour of the moral arguments by Dr. Matt Deaton. Chapter 11, Abortion Solved?
Blue light bulbs cast an eerie glow around a table in the middle of the room. A velvet drape covered a large object in the center of the table. Carol smiled. "Would you like to meet one of the next citizens of Klaipeda?" she asked. Without waiting for his answer, she slowly pulled the drape back. Beneath it sat a glass orb filled with some sort of liquid. In the dim light, he could see an object in the liquid. "We try to simulate the environment in the womb as closely as we can," Carol said. "So the lights in here are always down low." She tapped on a key on one of the laptop computers, and soft light from the base of the orb became a little brighter. The light illuminated a mass of skin and veins and tendrils at the bottom of the sphere. A long vein-covered tube snaked from the bottom of the orb to a tiny UDH floating in the center of the sphere. "Oh my, is he alive?" "Very much so." "And he's a she." From The Third Option by Ben Sharpton. Ectogenesis, the technology central to Ben Sharpton's novel The Third Option, will someday enable gestation of UDHs outside a mother's womb. Whether the devices look more like glowing orbs or Ziploc bags, as with the recent experiments with unborn developing lambs, science fiction will become medical reality, possibly within our lifetimes, and probably by the end of the century. The implications for abortion ethics are tremendous. Given artificial wombs' potential to honor the interests and values central to both sides of the traditional debate, facilitating choice and life, we might expect widespread enthusiasm. Ethicists Peter Singer and Deanne Wells predict that the ability to end pregnancy without terminating the UDH should enable pro-choice and pro-life adversaries to, quote, embrace in happy harmony, end quote. However, I've been broaching the idea with colleagues, students, family, and friends for more than a decade, and most are skeptical, some downright hostile. Many people who lean pro-life respond that women should maintain their pregnancies as nature or God intended. UDHs are too valuable to trust to a machine, gestation too important to botch. Women should consider the burdens of pregnancy before having sex, and those who become pregnant should accept responsibility for nurturing the vulnerable life within them. Many people who lean pro-choice respond that UDHs simply aren't worth the trouble. If a woman wants an abortion for any reason, we should respect her choice and carry it out in full, the UDH not only removed, but terminated. After all, it's only a UDH, it's her UDH, and if she wants its development to cease, she should be able to insist as much. Besides, this sounds like another ploy by men to control women. No, thank you. So despite my enthusiasm, if the idea isn't instantly resonating, you're not alone. But for a solution-oriented, peacemaking philosopher tired of the protracted and worsening division, which, thanks to our two-party system, also impacts environmental policy, national defense, firearms regulations, health care, and everything else, artificial wombs seem extraordinarily promising. No one gets what they thought they wanted, to force women to remain pregnant or to ensure UDHs are terminated, but everyone gets what they really wanted, freedom to end an unwanted pregnancy and the ability to see every healthy UDH grow into a happy child.
Feminist Disagreement.
One way to decide whether artificial wombs would ameliorate or exacerbate the abortion issue is by considering it through various feminist lenses. We already know that while some feminists generally support abortion, some generally oppose it. When it comes to artificial wombs, they're similarly divided. Maureen Sanders Stout explains why by bucketing feminists into three ideological camps. Liberal feminists argue that gender disparities in pay and power are the result of tradition and law, and promote equality through public policy, pushing for non-discrimination in the workplace, equal pay, and wide availability to abortion. If freed from natural gestation, liberal feminists argue that artificial wombs could help women pursue educational and career goals and might encourage society to stop thinking of women as caregivers. This could make women more successful employees and leaders, enabling a life more on par with men. It could also give some infertile women the freedom to have kids and allow women to begin a family after menopause. Radical feminists, these are Sandra Stout's labels, not mine, share liberal feminists' goal of gender equality, but argue that political solutions aren't enough, quote, because social institutions and cultural ideals are rooted in patriarchy, and patriarchy is rooted in fundamental biological differences, namely differences in muscular strength and sexual reproduction, end quote. Radical feminists see great promise in artificial wombs, some going as far as to argue for their necessity. For until women are untethered from their unfair burden of pregnancy, true equality with men is impossible. Finally, cultural feminists emphasize the importance of relational ties and their resulting moral obligations. They worry that artificial wombs would make women obsolete, leading to the devaluing of mothering, and with it, the devaluing of women generally, and even children. So, artificial wombs might free women from the burdens of pregnancy and empower many to have children who otherwise couldn't. They might usher in an age of sexual equality, the ultimate sexual unfairness finally rectified. But they might also undermine the social valuation of mothering and, as a result, the status of women and kids. Sandra Stout ultimately concludes that technology should only be pursued for medically therapeutic reasons and not as a convenient alternative to natural pregnancy, because artificial wombs would be, quote, inherently demeaning and disempowering to women as biological mothers, end quote. However, Singer and Wells disagree. Quote, we, at least, are not nearly so pessimistic about the abilities of women to achieve equality with men across the broad range of human endeavors. For that reason, we think women will be helped rather than harmed by the development of a technology that makes it possible for them to have children without being pregnant, end quote. Cultural feminists are right that where most people gestated in artificial wombs, society might forget how women were once the exclusive bearers of human life. However, the suggestion isn't that natural pregnancy should stop, but that terminal abortions could stop, replaced by artificial womb transplants. For this limited purpose, a substantial negative impact on the social valuation of mothering seems unlikely. In fact, it might affirm the difficulty of mothering and increase social respect for it. The technology wouldn't make much difference when it's the child's expected low quality of life motivating termination. But it would help a great deal when the pregnancy is burdening the mother or the UDH is unwanted. However, as I've learned, there are many objections. Here are a few of the better ones, followed by some possible replies.
The risk objection.
Machines will have a hard time replacing a human womb. One obstacle, umbilical cord blood vessels are smaller than any existing surgical tubing. Another, the mix of hormones and nutrients, time-released and precisely adjusted by the mother's body, isn't fully understood. Another, growing inside a human mother could be necessary to develop a sense of empathy and compassion, without which we'd all be sociopaths. Simply understanding the medical miracle of gestation is hard. Safely replicating it seems almost impossible. However, if medical progress required immediate perfection and zero risk, we wouldn't have ointments or aspirin, let alone dialysis and C-sections. When something is worth the trouble, we manage the risks and press forward. Perhaps whatever norms governed implementation of prototype NICU feeding tubes and breathing machines could be refined and repurposed. Perhaps we could test advances on unborn developing mice, and then primates, studying their long-term physical health, emotional, and social well-being. To proactively spur emotional development, perhaps we could make the membrane soft and sound permeable so nurses and volunteers could caress and sing to gestating UDHs. Focusing on solutions rather than problems is a conscious choice. And since an imperfect womb is preferable to certain death, surely this is one case where we all have reason to help figure it out, rather than rationalize why we shouldn't even try.
The finance objection.
Incubating unwanted UDHs in artificial wombs would be astronomically expensive. Further, every ecto-rescue would produce an orphan. The millions of terminal abortions carried out today could become millions of additional unwanted children. How could society ever pay for this? The costs could be split among health insurance, parents, and the state. Abortion is such a divisive issue. If a country's resources should be spent on anything, they should be spent on resolving a primary scourge on stability and civic friendship. Further, religious groups, abortion advocacy groups on both sides, and simply citizens passionate about abortion on both sides might be willing to donate. I would. Just as child support payments incentivize responsible sex today, making parents partially liable for an unwanted UDH's care could do the same. Maybe there are an estimated 56 million abortions globally each year, including more than 600,000 in the U.S., because abortion is relatively inexpensive. A stronger incentive to prevent regretful conception, not as reactive punishment, but as proactive motivation, could decrease the number of unwanted UDHs, easing the increased burden on orphanages. We could also better honor and support single mothers. When the father skips town and times are hard, is it any surprise powdered milk and diaper vouchers aren't enough to convince more women to embrace motherhood? Serious Planned Parenthood education in schools and more readily available contraceptives would help, but so too would universal preschool and nursery care, allowing single moms to more easily pursue a career. In addition to funding artificial womb research, Abortion Solutions advocate Kevin Degadon suggests extending safe haven laws that allow parents to turn babies over to the state without further obligation, as well as streamlining adoption procedures. Notice how none of these suggestions depend on glowing orb incubators. We can partially solve abortion right now. Worst case scenario, perhaps artificial wombs won't be a workable solution until they're affordable. New technologies, including medical technologies, almost always get cheaper over time, and so the finance objection may eventually resolve itself. However, we shouldn't turn that over to the market and cross our fingers. Investors have an incentive to keep costs high, so nonprofit and government research funding would likely bring about an affordable artificial womb faster. Last, minimizing unwanted UDHs in the first place seems a wise component of any comprehensive abortion solution. So let's add to the new tech wish list a cheap, reversible infertility treatment for both sexes. Fewer unwanted UDHs would decrease aggregate costs for both artificial gestation and orphan care. Scientists, do your thing.
The unnatural objection.
Technology is okay for some things, even medical things such as prosthetic limbs, hearing aids, and mechanical hearts. But if anything should retain its intimate, flesh-bound origins, it's child creation and care. Enfamil may lack the antibodies of breast milk, but assuming it's nutritious enough, evidenced by millions of healthy adults who drank it, the fact that it frees women from breastfeeding and enables men to better contribute to infant care seem good enough reasons to use it. If you're okay with baby formula, you should, in principle, be okay with artificial wombs. Again, in principle. No one's denying that the challenge of incubating humans will dwarf the difficulties of simply replacing natural milk. Further, no one's arguing that artificial wombs should replace natural gestation. You can entertain that possibility if you want, but the suggestion is only that artificial wombs should nurture unwanted and otherwise doomed UDHs. Think of it this way. If a baby's options were either starving or formula, we'd agree to feed them Enfamil. Similarly, if a UDH's options are either termination or an artificial womb, the choice seems clear.
The new normal objection.
The very existence of artificial wombs might pressure women to use them. As Sandra Stout puts it, quote, pregnancy could become perceived as so primitive and disgusting that it feasibly becomes a non-choice. Women who desire to retain their sexual appeal as a social power might perceive little choice but to opt for an artificial pregnancy, end quote. Widespread ectogenesis could lead to, quote, the perception of pregnancy as a disfiguring disability, pregnant women as potential contaminators of UDHs, and birth as barbaric, end quote. This is a fair point. Cochlear implants have put similar pressure on people with hearing disabilities, which many in the deaf community resent. However, the benefit of being able to cure deafness outweighs the implicit pressure felt by people who argue there's nothing to cure in the first place. The same for the implicit pressure LASIK surgery puts on people with thick glasses, Rogaine puts on balding men, and rhinoplasty puts on those of us with imperfect noses. That an option implicitly pressures people to exercise it isn't reason enough to declare it unethical. Further, this objection has more to do with artificial wombs replacing natural gestation than terminal abortion. Usage for one reason could widen the door for others, but given demand from infertile couples and parents of prematurely born babies, artificial wombs are coming, ready or not. As Singer and Wells put it, the gestation gap will close, quote, almost by accident by doctors attempting to save the lives of premature babies, end quote. A possible drawback of using them for all pregnancies isn't reason to reject them for the limited purpose of supplanting abortion.
The misuse objection.
Some object to artificial wombs because the technology could be misused. For example, what if they were repurposed to grow brainless clones, genetically engineered for organ harvest? Singer and Wells took this possibility seriously and argued against it on grounds that it would desensitize us to the value of human life. Quote, our attitude of care and protection to infants goes very deep. For normal adults, these feelings are an instinctive response to the appearance and behavior of a baby. For the sake of the welfare of all our children, the basic attitude of care and protection for infants is one we must not imperil. We think this sufficient reason for rejecting, at least for the foreseeable future, the proposal to grow non-sentient, preconscious, unfeeling embryos beyond the point at which they would normally have been sentient. End quote. I agree that we should resist any creepy temptation to grow brainless organ donors. However, while anticipating and heading off abuses is smart, most any technology can be misused, including kitchen knives, pain pills, and the internet. That a technology with a legitimate purpose might also be used for an unacceptable purpose usually isn't reason to block its creation. Some have argued that nuclear weapons were an exception, and I think we should slow and contain the rise of artificial intelligences. But usually the risk that something may be misused isn't reason enough to squash it.
An imperfect solution.
The case for artificial wombs as an alternative to terminal abortion may not be a slam dunk, but the balance of reasons does seem to lean in their favor. New challenges would emerge, and there would definitely be drawbacks. But being able to facilitate a pregnant woman's desire to end an unwanted pregnancy and simultaneously protect the value of the UDH, the central drivers behind the hereto intractable abortion debate, seems a win-win worth pursuing. As Stellan Whalen, Swedish author of the first philosophical article I read on ectogenesis, puts it, quote, if a new technology makes it possible to avoid conflicts between legitimate interests, it is our duty to use the new technology, end quote. However, some are proactively arguing that when artificial wombs inevitably arrive, parents should still be allowed to insist that an unwanted UDH not simply be removed, but terminated. Is this simply a pre-ecto era defense mechanism motivated by concern that any point ceded to the other side will be mercilessly exploited? Or are there compelling reasons why we should allow parents to terminate a UDH even when healthy and viable?